footballgameplan.com, where football makes sense. I'm Emory Hunt, the czar of the playbook, sitting here with the man Tyler Merkovich, and this is our high school recruiting wrap-up show. Now, Tyler, the big teams in the college football, the rich get richer, the poor get somewhat better. Who stands out? Who's your top 5 overall classes this recruiting season?
Well, let's start out with Gator Nation, because Florida and Urban Meyer are keeping up with them losing players to the draft. They got Ronald Powell, one of the top athletes. They also got another athlete, Matt Elam. They got a defensive back named Jonathan Dowling, who's great, but I like the D tackles, what they did. Dominic Easley from Staten Island and Sharif Floyd. This guy, Easley, he's the real deal. He plays with attitude. He plays with leverage. He's low, and he's strong and powerful. He's very quick. A couple years down the line, this kid is going to be one of the best defensive tackles in college football.
Oh, who you got at number 2?
Number 2, we got to go with Texas, led by former Dallas Cowboys star Jim Jeffcoat's son, Jackson Jeffcoat. He's a defensive end, and he's a beast. But they also got Jordan Hicks. They got Reggie Wilson, another defensive end. So they loaded up on defense, and then they addressed the need of wide receiver. Last year, they had a couple good wide receivers. They'll be improving, but Jordan Shipley kind of carried that bunch. But they got Mike Davis and Darius Wright, also 2 good wide receivers, and Taylor Bible, an underrated defensive tackle who's got a good head on his shoulders. They're great on defense.
Well, you look at teams like Florida and Texas, known for their defense, and they've stacked up on defense this year. So who you have at number 3?
Well, number 3, it's got to be USC, and they landed a huge blue chipper in Seantrell Henderson late, who he was about to go to Ohio State. This guy is a phenomenal offensive tackle. He's 6'9", he's got the size. So he's going to be a great lineman again for the Trojans, which they've been bringing in through the Carroll era. And Kiffin brings over Kyle Prater, also from the Midwest, from Illinois. He's a great wide receiver. Markeith Ambles. So they're getting targets for Matt Barkley. Robert Woods also. And like they need running backs, they really don't need them, but they bring them in anyway. And Dylan Baxter.
Well, you look at the receiving corps for USC. They kind of took a step back last year, and they need that influx of youth to come in and provide a spark for that offense in Matt Barkley. Who's number 4, I'm sorry.
Number 4, it's going to be a sleeper right here, the Auburn Tigers. And I'm going to put their class up there because they get Florida transfer Cameron Newton eligible next year. He was arrested for stealing a laptop down in Gainesville, but he found his way over to the Auburn Tigers, and Gene Chizik will have him as a starting quarterback, which makes him a lot better. But the standout here is Michael Dyer. This guy is strong. His legs are like tree trunks, and he's one of the top running backs in the nation. Trevon Reed at wide receiver, and they bring in a defensive end who spurned the Florida schools out of South Florida, Corey Lemonier, who spurned Florida State and a couple other schools. He's going to Auburn too. So Gene Chizik doing a great job bringing that War Eagle pride back there to Auburn.
Well, you look at the running back history of Auburn. You go all the way back to Lionel James. You even got Bo Jackson. You know, you got the new blood with Ronnie Brown, as well as
Caddy Hummer. Brandon Jacobs can't even find the field in the Auburn backfield.
Even the guy from New Orleans, Michael Burks, had a productive freshman year. But Auburn definitely with Michael Dyer. I like Dyer. Dyer's a good player. Now, number 5 on your list.
Well, it's got to go national champion Nick Saban's Crimson Tide, led by quarterback Phillip Sims, who will probably sit a year or maybe even redshirt because their quarterback who led them to the national championship is coming back, but they got a bunch of defensive backs. And that's going to help for the loss of Javier Arenas and Kareem Jackson, who are going to be the top corners in the draft, led by DeMarcus Milliner. He's one of the top D-backs, and they also bring in a wide receiver, DeAndrew White, and you can never have enough of those for quarterbacks who aren't top of the class. They hand the ball off, but the wide receivers are great in Alabama.
Well, you look at a wide receiver core or any college scheme across the country, you want to go at least 12 deep, so you want to have the best talent available out those 12 spots at the wide receiver position. Now, let's go by conference. You know, granted, that's the top 5. Each conference has a standout team that led in recruiting. So what's your team by team or conference by conference best team that did an outstanding job on the recruiting trail this year?
Well, in my top 5, I didn't have a Big Ten team, but the Big Ten did pretty good overall. But I'm going to go with Michigan because they landed DeMar Dorsey, one of the top defensive backs in the nation, very late. So he's going to go to Michigan, and they also got Cullen Christian. So those 2 guys are going to make up for the loss of Donovan Warren, who left early for the draft. And their D-backs were getting eaten up last year, so they're going to be very big. Richard Ash, a great defensive tackle from Florida. Rich Rodriguez pulls him over. And, of course, they've been talking about this kid for a while, the quarterback, Devin Gardner. He could spread it out. He could run it. He's gonna compete with Tate Forcier to get a lot of playing time this year.
It looks like the Big Ten is trying to get back to respectability. They did okay in the bowl games. You look at the Penn State game versus LSU. Who else has a good class?
Well, in the SEC, I talked about Auburn, I talked about Alabama, but Tennessee did a pretty good job thanks to Lane Kiffin recruiting. But Derek Dooley still gets Jawan James, an offensive tackle who's got really long arms. He's got a build on his body. He'll be a great tackle down the line. And he got a big physical wide receiver target in Derek Rogers, who he was probably going to go to Georgia, but he goes to Tennessee, and Dooley gets a pretty good class thanks to Kiffin. Now, in the future, he's got to start looking for the lower tier players and really improving them, trying to get the sleeper classes. So, sleeper players, because he's not going to be able to get these top recruits in.
Well, speaking of Lane Kiffin, now that you mentioned it, let's go back out to the Pac-10. Who had the top class in the Pac-10?
Well, I had USC on top, but look out for UCLA. Neuheisel's doing a great job, and he brings in a couple of running backs in Jordan James, who's going to be a great player, and Malcolm Jones. And they bring in a defensive end from Portland, Oregon, Owagmabi Adigizua. That kid is going to be the real deal. He's a little small for a defensive end, but he could play linebacker. He's going to be a good player. So Neuheisel's bringing in the recruits. Look out for UCLA to make a turn fast. But the thing that killed them was Brett Nottingham, the quarterback. He spurned UCLA for Stanford, and you know the problems the Bruins quarterbacks have been having these last couple of years.
Let's move on down to the Big 12. You know, Texas is usually the class of that conference. So who else stood out in the Big 12 this year?
Well, it's got to be the Oklahoma Sooners, who landed linebacker Corey Nelson. He decommitted late from Texas A&M to join one of his teammates, and they also bring in 3 new running backs. They lose Chris Brown. DeMarcus Murray will come back, but for the future, the running backs are stockpiling in Oklahoma.
Well, we'll be remiss, the studio here in New York City, we'll be remiss to mention the Big East. Who stood out to you in the Big East Conference this year? And if it's Rutgers, then say it, but if it's not, then, you know, we can't go show our face, you know, anytime soon.
Well, we're gonna go to West Virginia. Bill Stewart keeping the legacy of the Mountaineers going. They got wide receiver Deion Long and athlete LaTuan Anderson. So these players are gonna be good in that spread offense, because they like to see players who catch 3-yard passes and go all the way.
Well, so we can't show our face this week out here in New Jersey, New York area. So also, let's take a dip down to Conference USA. Who stood out to you in the Conference USA? One of the more underrated conferences in the country.
Well, Conference USA, Southern Miss got commit from Steve McNair Jr., Steve McNair's son, of course. Spurns the big schools to stay down in Mississippi, so he's going to be a good player for the Golden Eagles.
Let's go to the Sun Belt. Former Louisiana Raging Cajun myself. Let's hope the Raging Cajuns are in the top of the class of the Sun Belt.
We're going to go to North Texas, who has a cornerback named Stephen Ford and a bunch of JUCO transfers, so they did a great job in the Conference USA.
Well, that's going to help out their defense, because North Texas was able to move the football last year. Defensively, they gave up a lot of points, so getting a lot of JUCOs, they can come in right away and help out your program, get you a jump start, and help that defense out tremendously. Let's look at the WAC, Western Athletic Conference. Who stood out to you?
Well, I got Fresno State. They got Marcus McDade. He's a good quarterback, and you know Pat Hill. He's bringing in the recruits slowly but surely, and by the time they're juniors and seniors, they have a big impact on the field.
Well, at the independent conference, it's not really a conference, but you know, it's Notre Dame, Army, Navy. Army and Navy don't announce their recruits. So how did Notre Dame stack up this year in recruiting with the coaching change and everything?
Notre Dame did okay, but I think it could get better in the years to come for under Brian Kelly. He brings in a wide receiver named Taylor Jones, who's probably going to get a lot of looks. Golden Tate, he's gone to the NFL job, but they got Floyd and Rudolph, and a lot of defenses are going to key on the tight end and wide receiver. So Taylor Jones, maybe he'd have impact. Matt James, an offensive lineman. They're going to lose Eric Olson, one of their linemen, to the draft, and Lewis Nix, a defensive tackle. So they did pretty well.